My name's Duane. I'm a recovered relapser. And thank you for the committee for putting this on, and thank you for asking me to share on We Agnostics, and to share my observations on this chapter. And it moves. We start moving now in the book from the problem of alcoholism and into the solution of God. And like James finished on, no effective mental defence against picking up the first one. And straight away at the beginning of the chapter it talks about, in the preceding chapters you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope that we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Do we pick this stuff up or do we die? Simple. And they talk about, but it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were exactly of that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issues, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face facts. We must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Perhaps it was going to be that way with you, but cheer up, something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows you need not be disconcerted. And when you're absolutely cornered by this illness, and these guys and girls were real low bottom, hopeless alcoholics. They didn't have anywhere else to go, and when they're cornered by this, as I was, there was one. It was quite easy for me to accept spiritual help. We start talking a little bit about the strategies that we employ. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies and every other strategy did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could wish these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshalled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. And so they've smashed home the true nature of alcoholism in that. And they've been cornered by relapse. The strategies have been extinguished. And then they talk about a real dilemma. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that is exactly what this book is about. Its main objective is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. And the alcoholic problem is relapse. When I tap into that power, I don't relapse. That's my experience. And so as it moves on, page 46, my observations around this start talking about willingness, the stuff that we have to do, being willing and seeking, So it says we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. My mind can't comprehend the power that is God. It's too slammed shut. It's too small. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and effect a contact with him through prayer. Be on our knees. That was my experience, when I was cornered, and I said the simplest prayer that I knew to nobody because I was alone. Please help me. I had an experience in that moment. And as soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed by a sense of new power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. The 12 steps, really simple stuff. We embark on a 12-step journey. We found that God does not make too hard of terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad and roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. To those who earnestly seek, it is open, we believe, to all men. Let's use the word seek there twice. I have to seek. God don't come to me if I don't turn towards God. So on page 47, again, talking about laying aside our old ideas, resentment, willingness, and a spiritual experience. And it says, when therefore we speak of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice or resentment you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. Afterwards, we found ourselves accepting many things which seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth, but if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question: do I now believe, or am I willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. It's the start of your spiritual experience, just a simple willingness. And when I sit down with another man who's agnostic or atheist, and are you willing to believe that something helped me and that something can help you? That's it. Simple. If they say yeah, let's crack on. So on page 48 and 49, and my observations of this 2 pages about old ideas, our old mentality and our old thinking, and it talks about we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness and unreasoning prejudice. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual references to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. I had to change my point of view. I had to change, look at things in a different way. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became open-minded on spiritual matters as we have tried to be on other questions. When I'm cornered and this is offered as a solution, I'll take it, no matter what. In this respect, alcohol, or relapse, was the great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process, 20-year tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. And on page 49, old ideas again. When, however, the logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful guiding intelligence, right there, a perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. My mind slams shut. Can't comprehend it. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and the Omega, the beginning, the end. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? So them old ideas, we have to lay them aside. And so page 50. We start looking at, it's all step 2, and on one proposition, however, these men and women were strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they came to believe in a power greater than themselves, step 2, to take a certain attitude towards that power and to do certain simple things, take the steps and live by them principles, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace and happiness and a sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they showed the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them when they had a spiritual experience. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the conscious presence of God is today the most important factor of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. And that was my experience exactly there. In the face of collapse and despair, total failure of my human resources, a power and a peace and happiness and sense of direction flowed once I met a few simple requirements. So we're going to page 52. I think a really misunderstood page, and it talks about second paragraph. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems, not alcoholism, the same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy, and we couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution to these bedevilments more important than whether we would see newsreels of the lunar flight? So I'm spiritually sick, and those problems are of my own making. And it talks about the same on page 53. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was the choice to be? And I wonder, page 55, I'm going to start wrapping up. And page 55. When we seek within, and actually we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it is there. God is within. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and the miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have from a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, after continual relapse, it was only there that he may be found. It was so with us. We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice and resentment and all the other things that block us off, enables you to think honestly and encourage you to search diligently within yourself, then if you wish, you can join us on a broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. And it did to me. And I'm just going to end on an example of, they share a lot of experiences in here, and there's an experience now, and it talks about, in this book, we read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. He had an experience. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought was an overdose of religious education. He resented it. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him, not alcoholism. Post-war disillusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse, brought him to the point of self-destruction. Then a man, armed with the facts about himself, went and see him. One night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience and recovered. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question. Maybe it's one we should ask ourselves. Is it possible that all religious people I've known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. He had a moment of clarity. It crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? And I'll leave it there.